introduction to Rick. For those few of you who don't know him, Rick is the Executive Director of FINDS, Foundation for the International Non-Government Development of Space, and which has a $25 million endowment to fund, I'm using space ventures, I guess maybe you can, yeah, thank you, okay. But Rick is also, Rick is outstanding in his field for starting things and getting things organized and making things happen. He's one of the founders of the Space Frontier Foundation, ProSpace, Lunar Corp, Mir Corp, mind you. He even sold, just last week, I think, the first ticket ever sold to a commercial paying passenger on a space mission. Right. So, without any further words, let me introduce Rick Tumlinson.
Good morning and welcome to the revolution. By the way, required reading, Robert A. Heinlein, The Moon is a Harsh Mistress. Get the book, read the book. I fell asleep reading that last night. It was refreshing to get back to the core of things again. I don't know if you know it, Space Frontier Foundation's first check of $50 came from the Heinleins. Anyway, it's interesting that we're here in Las Vegas. We're in the middle of a place that 50, 100, well, let's say 60, 70 years ago was considered a barren, useless chunk of ground that nobody could do anything with. Until a great visionary named Bugsy Malone and a few others who were socially unacceptable themselves decided to put something here. And that's what we're about. I've been talking, obviously, as we wind up for this conference, talking to friends and associates about the moon, and even one of my co-founders said, oh, the moon is just a slag heap. It's got all the visual appeal of a pile of gravel. Well, again, Las Vegas, folks. The hand of humanity has transformed this place into a multi-billion-dollar industrial base that powers this state and is an economic driver in this part of the country. Now, it may not be what you would consider tasteful activities in some arenas, but it works. And to cross the land to get here, you had to cross what was once called the Great Western Desert of the Midwest. Nothing will ever grow there. Nothing will ever useful will come from there. Very unappealing. Just lots and lots of grass and alien creatures shooting back at you whenever you try and do something there. Luckily, we don't have to deal with that problem on the moon so far. So, we're up against a very interesting challenge here. We're trying to go somewhere where, culturally, our society turned its back away from a few years ago. By the way, the lunar missions, the Apollo missions, if you really think about it, were based on entertainment. If it was really some driving need, if it was really some huge scientific drive, we'd still be going. What happened was, when the ratings dropped, we turned away and walked away. Yes, we did it with a lot of government language. Yes, we did it with a lot of, sort of regulatory, inside game types of discussions, but we as a culture turned away because it wasn't fun anymore. Okay? And that's what's interesting to me as we begin to see the divergence, and hopefully later on some coming together of the two approaches to space, i.e. the space as a program approach and the space as a place approach. That's the kind of things we're running into. Discussions about legitimacy, what we should be doing in space as a culture, etc. Some of us on the government side see it as something that's well, it's something we have to do, and it's space, and it has to be handled the right way, and you have to have the right stuff to go there. Folks, we all have the right stuff. The people who built this country and many of the other countries in the world and put together the societies and free societies that dominate this planet have the right stuff. And those are the people that are going to be doing it in space. Now, what's great today is when I say welcome to the revolution, I can actually mean the revolution is underway. I can actually put it that way. The revolution is happening today. This year, the year 2000, may well be looked at as the turning point at which the private sector, the people, began to take over and slowly, eventually took over the lead in opening the space frontier. And I think it's happening this year. But it's been a long, long battle. I remember in 1989, I think it was, sitting in a law firm office in Washington, D.C. with a group of other insane people. David Gump, Jim Dunstan, a few other folks like that, and an old Virginian in a what do they call those, seersucker suit, blue and white seersucker suit, sitting at the end of the table named Tom Rogers, who looked out at us and said, "Gentlemen, we're going to the moon." I said, "Yeah." We put together videos pitching it. We put together a whole campaign to put it together. We were going to launch something about the size of a basketball that would get to the moon and say, I got here with no government money, and interestingly, given the conference down the hall, have a Coke and a smile, or whoever funded the original thing. And I remember we put together this whole video with shots of Peter Jennings with the thing cut in above him, you know, the Lunar mission going off to the moon, etc. It's 10 years later. 10 years later. David Gump has mortgaged his house countless times, run up his credit overflow countless times, and finally, 10 years later, they've landed a client. And it's for them. 10 years. It's a tough fight. And anybody who's not up for that kind of fight should just leave the room right now, folks, because you're just dreaming otherwise, okay? Now, the nice thing about the moon, NewSpace, what I call the near frontier. By the way, let me make an aside there, because I'm trying to get everybody to buy off on this idea so we can have a little fewer conflicts with our friends in government, etc. I divide space cleanly and neatly. It's, you know, Rick's handy-dandy guide to space. Is that if the Earth is the center of an expanding bubble of human activities, the edge of that bubble right now, human economic activities, basically sits on the moon. Inside of the moon has been heavily explored and basically tromped around on by human beings for 30, 40 years. Hell, we're running telephone poles through there in the form of communication satellites, etc. Lewis and Clark have done a hell of a job in that arena. Beyond that is what I call the far frontier. Now, the far frontier is that arena in which we have not had necessarily human activities or exploration to any large degree. But there's another way to divide those. From the moon inwards, a business plan begins to make sense, and you will only, as you get closer, the giggles go down in the boardroom as you're trying to present it. Okay, it's a transition zone. Beyond the moon, the idea of putting together funds in the form of public tax dollars or National Geographic Society membership contributions, etc., become possibly the leading way of operating in space at that point. So to me, that's sort of the breakdown. Now, the reason I had to do that in my mind was I was constantly in conflict, unable to sleep, developing ulcers, etc., trying to figure out what to do about the interaction between the public and private sectors. And it was making me nuts. It was killing me. Because I love NASA, like anybody does in this country and around the world, and watch the agency do great things, and the other governments of the world that are involved in space. But there's a problem there. I love NASA, but you know, if I were in a family and I had a brother or sister or a son who was a drug addict, I would love them too. But NASA is addicted to the power and control of being in the near frontier. Not any fault of their own. That is basically due to a lack of visionary leadership at the top of our government in the United States. Well, a bureaucracy without leadership basically hunkers down and begins to heavily plant, fertilize, and try and expand its turf. And that's what happened. Well, if we can redirect that government agency out beyond the far frontier, send Lewis and Clark back over the hill, and basically get them the heck out of the near frontier so the free enterprise, public, or basic citizens, the people themselves can begin to participate, we can begin to create a new alignment in space. What's interesting, however, is in that, shall we say, new space order, God forbid I said that, the moon is the transition zone, as I said, and there's a role for both, and we can create a partnership involving. There are a lot of people who say, well, that, you know, let's go to Mars. There's the Mars movement out there, the Mars Society, people like that rolling along, and you know, I tell you, I support him totally. In fact, Fines gave, although he doesn't ever admit it, gave Bob Zimmerman his first $100,000. Our logo's on the side of that little base in the Arctic there, or in Greenland. And the reason we did that is because we want to see that pressure applied. We want to see NASA pushed on, and the government pushed on, to basically, NASA gets what it wants, which is a trip to Mars and beginning the exploration of Mars. Now, there are some people who say, well, you don't need the moon to go to Mars. You just shoot on out there. Start throwing ships, or what I call expendable people, at Mars. I think that's rather culturally naive. I think what that doesn't recognize is the same alliance in our society that you have to go to get that money just fought a war last year, and the bottom line of that war was no allies shall die. The same year, a lady in Antarctica came down with a health problem, and the entire world stopped. That's the same culture you've got to go to convince to send people on basically what is possibly a one-way trip to Mars. I believe firmly that the only way we're going to get to Mars in any sustainable way is from space. You don't go to Mars directly from the Earth, you go from space, number one. And number two, that on the way there, you're going to do basically the Mercury, Gemini, Apollo type approach, where you learn to walk before you run and then fly. And in that scenario, I believe you actually have to train your astronauts somewhere where there's dust, vacuum, extremes of temperature, and if they fall down and cut their suit, they could die. And that basically is the moon. And I believe that that's where the training should take place. And I believe that given a partnership wherein NASA, when they are directed, if they're directed by the next president or whatever, to, let's say, go to Mars, isn't going to want to be seen as going to the moon on the way to Mars. That rekindles a thing called the Space Exploration Initiative, which is constantly, thrown up there and bashed back down as the wrong way to go in a very expensive way. And indeed, it may have been. Well, it definitely was. But if you if you do it with a commercial partnership on the moon, then the agencies involved in going to Mars do not necessarily have to spend all of their money or their PR or their political capital in selling a trip to the moon first. In other words, they can leverage off an infrastructure that is partially funded and supported by the private sector. Those kinds of activities are going to start very soon. There are very interesting commercial projects that are going to involve beginning the development of some of that infrastructure with private sector dollars. But let me go back for a minute, back to the long battle we've had. For 10 years or so, and longer for many people in this room who've been pushing the ideas for a long, long time, we've been fighting a lot of different enemies and overcoming a lot of challenges on our way to the frontier. And a lot of them were built by ourselves. Some of these, for example, I remember we were doing Lunar business plans, and we were looking at different ways of putting them together, and we began to learn a rule of don't put an if on an if. And believe me, if you're putting a business plan together to go into space, if you've got more than one if or one need for what some science fiction writers call unobtainium, your business plan is not going to sell. We're going to build an untested project and fly it on an untested, unbuilt rocket and do that with your money. I'm sorry, it doesn't work. You have to learn what these people are after that are out there funding these kind of things. And somebody's betting their entire PR budget for their corporation, like Coca-Cola, for a 2-year or 3-year stint. They want certainty. They want certainty. They want triple, quadruple redundancy. They want more certainty in their advertising dollars than the space agencies require in their safety. And you have to understand those kind of things. It took a while to learn. We had to learn, again, how to work with entities such as NASA. And NASA is slowly, parts of NASA are starting to learn to work with us. We have some folks from NASA here, and I'm looking forward to talking with them and interacting. And yes, we still have fights in other areas, but I think the moon we can begin to cooperate. Now, I hope that works. What I'm afraid of is little things that constantly used to happen in the mammals, where the Tyrannosaurus may not be actually after the mammal, but was looking at the Brontosaurus and stepped on the mammal. Oops, sorry, oh, look, pancakes. And that's the kind of thing we could have happen today. For example, let me imagine just a crazy, wacky scenario here. Somebody puts together a commercial mission to go to the moon and retrieve lunar soil, bring it back to the Earth, and sell it as part of their business plan. Now, out of a pure and completely accidental coincidence, 3 weeks after they announce their business plan, NASA announces they're going to release several pounds of lunar soil for study around the world. Boom, their business plan has collapsed. On purpose? No, I doubt it. No, it's just coincidental. Great minds run in the same gutter, as a friend of mine used to say. That kind of thing can happen. That kind of thing has happened. And those are the kind of things we're going to have to deal with. But I think we can, if we can begin in organizations and groups like this to define that role, begin working together, begin coordinating with each other, and begin the discussions. The other things that we have to deal with, again, have to do with getting real. We have to get real. We have to understand things. For example, fines this year, we haven't publicly announced this, but I've signed the first ever interplanetary data purchase agreement. The money has been exchanged, the agreement's been signed with a company that will be presenting this week. What was interesting about that was I was dealing with scientists and engineers. I'm coming at it from a business point of view. Frankly, I hope they succeed, but if they don't, in the meantime, we're going to try and teach a lesson about reality and business. I'm sitting there talking to scientists and engineers saying, by a date certain, I want my data. What the data is that they're sending a probe to the moon. After they do their lunar injection, they're going to turn their instruments back and see if they can acquire terrestrial GPS. If they can acquire terrestrial GPS, we may find out that we can use terrestrial GPS systems through triangulation at lunar distances. That is, we believe, a valuable service and something worth doing. Well, once they do their lunar injection, their TLI, then they've got to turn those instruments on and aim them at the Earth. At that point, whether or not they acquire a signal, the experiment will be considered a success. If not, and if they cannot turn those instruments, and if they do not get that probe in the right place by a date certain, I get their car, I get their furniture, I take it away. Okay? Now, that was very hard to explain to these guys because they were going, well, it's space. It's space. Space is special. Oh, so many things could go wrong. And I just said, I'm a customer. I am a customer. Get used to it. Okay? I want my product, or I want everything you own. I want to make you hurt. That's how the business world works when you put stakes on the line. Well, they learned the lesson, and in fact, just to be extra cruel, I made one of their a lawyer in one of their competing lunar firms write the contract for them to sign. And everybody signed it, and I figured, okay, if it's that tough and they can all sign it, we're going to go for it. So keep your eye on that project. I'll let them decide whether or not to discuss it here. There are other enemies out there that we have to deal with, again, outside of ourselves. There are people, for example, the organization United Societies in Space, for example, which wants to socialize space before we get there and lay down all the rules. I had a recent exchange with them on the internet. Okay, well, I fired a few rounds in their direction. And I had one of their people come back, one of their official people come back to me and said, we have to go out there and create all these structures in space, guys, because when you get to the moon, who are you going to lease it from? I couldn't answer that email. I had no answer for that person. They are obviously already on a different planet from where I am. These are the kinds of things we're up to. But we can pull it off, and we are pulling it off, and people are making it over the barbed wire, and they are charging ahead, and it is happening this year. This year, we acquired a space station, folks. The rebels acquired a space station. Okay, that's a beginning. This year, the rebels got a corporate sponsor. This year, another very quiet team called Idea Lab is out there that doesn't want anybody to know about them, and I'm sorry, oops. They're out there. They're going to come out in a few months and announce a fully funded lunar mission. Guess what, folks? We have the first commercial race to the moon. It starts in the year 2000, and it's happening right now. It has begun. The revolution has begun. In the meantime, several countries and agencies around the world that had not been looking necessarily so much at space, that had pulled back when we pulled back, are starting once again to open up their imaginations and reach out. The Europeans, we're going to hear about, have some lunar mission plans. The Indian Space Agency has just announced it's interested in going to the moon. Others are coming on board. The Russians, some of their private firms are going to be involved in some of these projects. Solar sails are being developed to fly to the moon. Tether systems are being developed to sling spacecraft to the moon. These are happening, and people are actually out looking for financing now. The culture is starting to begin, in a very tiny way, to understand that they have the power. We have the power to open the frontier. We are the frontier. And given that, I have a lot of hope. When I look around this room and I see some of the people here that I have known have been digging through the trenches, dodging the bullets, dodging the T-Rex's foot, doing all kinds of things to survive, and they're still going, I see the people who are going to open the frontier. And you're here in this room. And I'm proud to be amongst you. From now on, we can say we are in the revolution. We are on our way. You are part of a family of people who have decided to move to the frontier and challenge it. And you're going to do all kinds of crazy, wacky things that are going to upset the status quo. But that's what frontiers are about. Frontiers are about change. They're about challenge. They're about transgression. They are about going beyond borders and pushing borders backwards. Pushing them forward, pushing them outwards. But those borders quite often are not so much the physical, the scientific, or the engineering as they are the psychological. And that's what's happening right now. We are getting and finally giving ourselves permission to dream, and permission to go out and grasp those dreams and make them real. Have a wonderful 2 days. Let us know what you think about this thing, where we are, what we're doing, how it goes. But we would like to see you back next year. I'm excited about this. I think we're starting to create some momentum. There's not a lot of people in this room. Believe me, by next year, after the first couple of commercial lunar missions are under construction or possibly already on their way to the moon, this room will have a lot more people in it. Pioneers always go out in stragglers, in little groups at first. One or two little guys in coonskin caps and stuff. Brave ladies in wagons. Families moving out, building houses, building farms, going for it, and eventually the culture realizes, oh my God, look, somebody else did it. You know, everybody wants to be first to execute a proven idea. Well, that's the kind of things we're dealing with. So, thank you very much for coming. Have a great 2 or 3 days, and let's have some fun. By the way, the main gamble here is getting to the moon, not necessarily downstairs. You know, I know 1 or 2 of you are going to come back with stories from years from now going, you know, I financed my lunar mission in Las Vegas. I wish you luck. Thank you.